You know, over the weekend or every time I think about doing my show, I'm always thinking about the, kind of news stories. What news stories are there? Maybe we can dive into some other detail in some stories. But the only thing that matters right now in the grand scheme of the American political conversation, of the American landscape, is whether or not we Americans can get the 2020 election results right. That's what matters. Can we get it right? Can we do something about what is now evident to everyone paying attention, the massive election fraud? Or are we just stymied and just can't figure out what way to go with it, what to do about it? The question we need to be asking ourselves cannot be, we must stop agreeing with anyone who is saying, did election fraud occur? Did the election fraud that occurred make a difference? How much of a difference? Does it really matter? These are not the questions anymore. The only question is how to use our American system of governance, the Constitution and the laws, to make the election outcome, to make the decision about who is inaugurated on January 20th, 2021, comport with the will of the voters. How? It is not whether we can use our election system to force the right result. It must be how. How do we use the system we have to bring about the right answer? The election fraud evidence continues to mount, and it's insurmountable. It seems insurmountable. It is irrefutable. It is more information comes out all the time, and yet we seem to be in a place where you even have elected Republicans, such as my own U.S. Senator John Cornyn, who has been widely despised by conservatives for decades, and certainly in recent election cycles, people are wishing somehow, it's so hard to remove an incumbent, but recently actually put out a statement. Republican Senator John Cornyn from the great state of Texas put out the statement, well, Trump hasn't proved his case of election fraud. So I guess so Congress can't do anything about it. Congress can't do anything about it. He's actually said that. That was a press release, which of course got wide attention, especially among the leftists. So in the first 5 today, I want to start with reminding you the question is not whether or not we can figure out what happened. We know what happened. The massive election fraud, the attempt to steal the re-election of President Trump and hand it by fraud to Joe Biden. So we already know what happened. And the question cannot be, can we do anything about it, or is it too late? The answer is our system has to comport, has to get around to bringing the right result, the fair result, the honest result of the elections of 2020. And it is so important. I was trying to think of analogies because part of what you hear people say, like John Cornyn and other alleged Republicans, is, well, there's some evidence, but there's cheating in every election. We don't know nothing special here, when everyone can see that it was a combination of numerous massive efforts at election fraud through the electronic manipulation of voting tabulation software, the whole Dominion voting Smartmatic issue, where it was feeding of the same ballots over and over and over and over through the ballot counters, where it was the dropping of ballots that were a result of the completely unnecessary push for mail-in ballots in this election cycle. So the use of massive fraudulent mail-in ballots dropped into place when needed on election night, when the leftists figured out they hadn't cheated quite enough with their algorithm to get Biden over the finish line. So then they decided, well, we're not going to use mail-in ballots. The scope of fraud and the breadth of it, the kinds of fraud and the amount of fraud are enough all by themselves for Americans who are honest and paying attention to say, clearly Joe Biden did not win. Clearly Trump won re-election, and we are facing, the argument from the left is because I don't even know who you blame, and that's one of the questions people have is who did all this? I don't think it's just one person. I think Soros-affiliated people were certainly involved. I think Dominion Voting Systems and Smartmatic and their officials were very much involved. I think officials in most of the swing states, probably all the swing states and other states were involved. There was a massive involvement of many people. But the question for the American people is, are we going to agree? Because their argument kind of is, because we succeeded in cheating and you didn't catch us soon enough, And now we have Electoral College a week away. It's a week from today. So the answer, the left is kind of arguing, well, because we managed to pull all this off and we did it under the radar and you didn't see it coming or didn't see it coming fast enough or you didn't fix it fast enough, you have to just surrender the free elections America is founded on. You have to surrender the right of the American people to choose their president. That's what the left is arguing. That's what John Cornyn is arguing. He is not arguing anything noble or virtuous or righteous. He's arguing because the leftists managed to steal this election in a way that we didn't see it coming, we couldn't fix it ahead of time, we couldn't catch up with all of the fraud fast enough, we're simply forced as the American people to accept a fraudulent election. This is what Cornyn is arguing. This is what all the elected Republicans who are equally weighing in with these chicken-hearted statements. Well, I guess he hasn't proved it. But I want to dive in and talk about this much more. I want to make a couple of analogies to you. One is, if, that everyone's arguing that this is, the evidence is just circumstantial. Yes, we had ballot stuffing. Yes, we had people testifying under penalty of perjury. Normal, everyday citizens who have no interest in becoming political or television or media stars are going out on a limb, signing their name under penalty of perjury, telling the legislatures and the courts in various cases, this is what happened. I saw it happen. You have that kind of determination on the part of American citizens willing to put themselves out on a limb, and you have the spineless Republicans and, of course, Democrats who are happy with the result of Biden winning, but you have the spineless Republicans saying, well, seems like we can't prove enough fraud here. So I want to run through two analogies. One is the first, or one more point, and then two analogies. The point being, the argument that the left and John Cornyn and other spineless Republicans are saying is this: Trump hasn't proven election fraud, and therefore we can't take any legal action based on all the fraud we know about because Trump hasn't proven election fraud. And I want you to focus on, think about, what does proof mean in a case like this? They act like that unless Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani or anyone else involved in this can produce an affidavit sworn under penalty of perjury by every member of the Dominion voting machine company leadership, everybody who heads up Smartmatic, everybody involved in the stuffing of the ballot boxes in the legislature, in the voting booths around this country. Unless Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and everybody else can produce sworn affidavits by all the wrongdoers admitting their wrongdoing, say, yeah, as a matter of fact, well, dang, you caught us. We did try to steal the election. Here's what we did. We allowed electronic manipulation of voting data. And then we shifted voting data using algorithms. And then we had people on the ground keeping track of the election night returns. And when we saw that clearly Trump was going to win re-election anyway, then we quick froze up the counting in the relevant states and dropped in these magical mail-in ballots, millions of them, all pro-Biden, all of them going Biden's way, not Trump's way. Yes, we confess to all of that. What Cornyn and the other spineless people are saying is that unless the kind of proof, which is practically a factual admission of all wrongdoing, is produced by Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani, that Trump hasn't proven his case. That is ludicrous, and that is what they are arguing, because the evidence is overwhelming, and circumstantial evidence does count. Circumstantial evidence is used all the time in criminal prosecutions. Most times, they don't want to have merely circumstantial evidence. It's much better, of course, to have direct eyewitness testimony, other forms of direct evidence, physical evidence of some kind to prove a criminal case. But circumstantial evidence is not somehow inadmissible. It is what is relied on all the time. So here are my two analogies. This is what I am telling you, these two analogies, this is really what John Cornyn and the Republicans who are spinelessly weighing in saying, well, haven't proven fraud, so I guess we all just got to shut up and let Biden take office. Imagine in a criminal prosecution for murder, how dedicated our entire system would be to getting to the truth of what happened. If you had a criminal prosecution and the prosecutor was seeking the death penalty, our system bends over backwards to make sure that justice is being done, bends over backwards to make sure that every legal argument is tracked down, briefed and argued and ruled on, every possible indicia of bias of the prosecutor or some of the police or the witnesses, every possible avenue of defense that would either say, prove a person's innocence or in some lesser way mitigate the charges that were laid against them. You might reduce charges based on some facts. We go out of our way to make sure we do not wrongly impose the death penalty in this country. I'm not saying we have been perfect. Of course, there have been times when innocent people were put to death and wrongly. And what we have done as a result is grown more determined to make sure we uncover every bit of information. That is the attitude every judge, state and federal court judge in this country, and every legislator in this country who is sitting in judgment on this election, that is the attitude they should have. Because this case, getting the election results right, is just as important as whether or not you sentence someone to death in a criminal prosecution. We have to have that level of determination. And what you have instead is governors saying, well, we can't really pursue that. We don't really know. No, we're not going to do an audit. No, we're not going to do signature verification. No, we're not going to pursue that. I don't think we've got to do an audit in these machines. You have a lackadaisical, kind of tossing your hands up. What are we going to do? We can't really do that attitude. And that's unacceptable when you are talking about changing the leadership of this country, changing the outcome of an election, putting someone in that Oval Office in Washington, D.C. It's unacceptable to have the lackadaisical attitude that is spewing out of too many people's mouths in this election cycle, including John Cornyn. We have to have the tenacity, the determination, the way you'd have it in a criminal prosecution for murder, which is you have to uncover every stone. You have to understand what happened. We can wait for the truthful answer in the election. We can wait to find out the scope of fraud, the depth of fraud, how the machines were manipulated, how many votes it impacted. We must pursue the truth. Second analogy in today's first five. If somebody was watching someone's house, sitting in their own home, looking at the house across the street, and they see a car full of people pull up, but they're masked so you can't see them, and they jump out of the car and they have blowtorches and gasoline and other highly flammable liquids, and they run around the house and they pour that gasoline and they use the blowtorches and they throw Molotov cocktails and the house erupts in flames, and the neighbor across the street calls to report arson, and the police say, well, we can't really be sure it's arson. We don't know it's arson. Just because you saw the people with the gasoline and other flammable liquids, and you saw the blowtorches, and you saw the Molotov cocktails, unless you have an ID, you can tell us exactly who did it, unless you can name the people that you couldn't even see because they had masks on, unless you have the serial numbers of the blowtorches, we can't conclude it was arson. We don't know. Maybe it wasn't arson. Maybe it was spontaneous combustion of that house. You don't know. People, it is that level of idiocy on the part of the legislators, governors, court judges, everyone involved in this process. They are watching with that level of certainty what happened in these elections and trying to pretend they can't figure out whether or not they should conclude that arson occurred. You don't have to pretend. We don't have to indulge stupid. We don't have to indulge the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. We don't know what happened. Hey, somehow seems Biden won. We don't know. We don't have to tolerate that. We don't have to put up with that. We, the people of this country, have got to be insisting that every person involved in this process feels the heat from the people of the United States of America saying, we want the truth. And we demand that you do your job and that you look at all of the allegations of vote fraud, including running numerous ballots through the machines, including the thing we're talking about happened in Georgia. We had that wonderful video showing that when everything was shut down and people were sent off for home for the day, and then we have the election workers pulling the suitcases out and filled with ballots and running ballots through after the poll watchers were gone. And that same incident in Georgia, consistent with the timing of those ballots being pulled out and run through, there's a major spike in the vote count, and it wasn't for Trump. It was for Biden. But somehow, we all are supposed to sit back and say, well, we don't know for sure. So I called this first five, asked the right question, and I mean this very earnestly and sincerely. Stop indulging the pundits and elected officials and defenders of the Democrat media mob who are saying, well, we just can't tell, we don't know, could have been fraud. Clearly we've seen fraud, and the idea that we're going to accept it or accept a decision by a legislature or a court to say, well, we can't look into it. Sorry, when the consequence, it's not like whether you're going to have to pay a $100 fine for a speeding ticket that you want to pursue challenging further. It's not a little issue. It is the future of America. Not just who runs this country for 4 years, but whether or not we can ever rely on a free and fair election again in this country if we don't get to the root of what the left pulled off in this election cycle. I have a lot more to say on this, but that, my very fine friends, is today's First Five.